Hello and happy Monday, everybody. Welcome to Brain Balance Live. I'm Jen. I am a crazed, busy mom of three, and this is Heather Wells, our beautiful, brilliant expert in many things, the brain. How are you, Heather?
I'm doing great.
You're doing great. We're all hanging in there with the best of them, I think.
Yes. Yeah. I was getting in here and I was like, oh, my camera's not here. That's important. So it's my fault. We're a couple minutes late. I was getting going like there's no camera.
Sometimes my camera just chooses not to work and I have to restart everything. So listen, you are not alone. So if you guys have been here with us before or you are new to our show, Heather, as you can see, you can follow her at The Hidden Turn. She is a board certified cognitive specialist, a therapist. She is a National Autism Summit speaker. And recently, the Brain Balance Center's work has been featured and analyzed by, you said it's Harvard and Cambridge, right?
Yes, two separate studies. Yeah, Harvard did a 10-year study on our program and to see not only the growth we get, but hey, it lasts because we're building new neural pathways. Yes. Lower ADHD index scores, better emotional regulation, super tied to what we're talking about today, better executive functions. And then Cambridge a few weeks ago released their first research study on our program showing the great improvements we get in all 12 areas of executive functions that they assessed: attention and memory and reasoning and things like that. So it's great to have these prestigious organizations doing research on our work and seeing how successful it is.
Yes, and on to what we are going to be talking about today, and something that is really near and dear to my heart. Today we're talking about ADHD and depression. And if you have any questions for Heather, she is always open to answering them on the fly during the show. Or if you're seeing this on the replay, drop your questions into the comment section because we love using your feedback for topics and later discussions. So it's not too late if you're watching this on the replay. So Heather, tell us what we're going to be starting off talking about with this topic.
Yeah, there are so many individuals who have been misdiagnosed with depression and the ADHD was missed. The opposite can happen, but it doesn't happen as frequently. Or an individual has both and one of those is missed, and usually it is the ADHD that's missed. And so we have to take depression very seriously, but is that really what it is? And if not, let's look in other areas. And there's a lot of overlap. Many individuals have both. There's also a lot of overlapping symptoms. So it's easy to see why they get confused. And so please take to heart what we talk about today so that when you go do those visits, you know the types of information to share to do what's called a differential diagnosis. You are a huge part of the team of getting the right treatment for yourself or for your kids. And I love Russell Barkley is just one of the foremost researchers on ADHD. And he said ADHD is not a mood disorder. It's a failure to regulate mood disorder. That pause is important. So we know that kids with ADHD and other neurodevelopmental challenges, particularly more in the right hemisphere, but really any types of neurodevelopmental challenges often have some emotional regulation issues. And that is brain function. That we talked before about how attention is regulation. I have to have regulation to ignore the distraction to attend. I have to feel my emotions mounting, be in touch with them, know what to do, put on the brake pedal and handle things correctly. But from a neuropsychological standpoint, regulation is all about what? Connectivity in the brain. What isn't?
Everything.
Things are. So do we have enough highways of communication going in the brain so that I can regulate emotions? Some people don't realize that emotions are just as much a part of cognition as academic skills are. And in fact, you have to have regulation to succeed academically to your utmost anyway. But so many individuals try multiple antidepressants because they are down. They are emotionally dysregulated. It's not helping. And all of a sudden, boom, oh, there was a neurodevelopmental issue that was missed. Yeah. So that's why we're talking about this today.
I feel like this is like something too that a lot of adults are probably going to want to look at in themselves, because I have some friends who, were just high functioning enough their whole lives that they did not realize that they had ADD or ADHD.
Yes, this happens. ADHD gets missed a lot when it is the inattentive type. And that is more frequent in females than males of any age. And there are some stereotypes. Women are more prone to depression than men by a long shot. They're about 70% more likely to be diagnosed with clinical depression, but how many of those are misdiagnoses? We do know there are more hormone fluctuations. There's a lot of involvement there. But because of that, if anyone who has the inattentive type is more likely for the ADD to be missed. It's called ADHD regardless of whether hyperactivity is there. And it's even more skewed in being missed for females, and that is of any age. And, ADHD diagnoses, I mean, the official term, what was it, 1986 when it came out? So if there are, women my age or even a little bit older, a little bit younger, you may have been suffering with ADHD all your life and you've just known something is amiss and you might have beaten yourself up about it. And you've tried antidepressants and it hasn't helped. And this may be why. This is such an important conversation for people of all ages.
Yes,
definitely.
I love that.
So let's move on. And so when we think about what jumps in your head when you hear ADHD, I mean, people think of hyperactivity, physical hyperactivity, and yet only 25% of kids ages 6 to 12 have physical hyperactivity. Only 25%. And then beyond that, it goes drastically down. 5% of adults have physical hyperactivity. What is it instead? In the majority of cases, it is internal hyperarousal. And that can be racing thoughts. It can be emotional roller coasters. It can be, I get flooded with emotions. I don't even have self-appraisal. I'm kind of lacking some self-awareness to feel it coming on. A lot of individuals have decreased body awareness, so they don't feel that throbbing head, that knot in their stomach, their pulse racing, the sweating that gives them a hint that, hey, I'm escalating. And then that impacts being able to hit the brake pedal, not being impulsive, and let me think through this. Let me look at this from another point of view. So this messes with motivation, perspective, and emotional regulation, because it is much harder to bring an emotion down from a 10 than it is from a 4, 5, 6. So, but yes, the impulsivity is very much a part of it. And we've talked before, we did an entire show about the difference between attention and distractibility and all the forms of attention. ADHD is not an inability to attend, although that's what people tend to think. There are different types of attention, selecting which thing to attend to, switching attention from one thing to another, dividing attention. There are multiple types of attention that tend to be the issue. But we're going to talk about rejection sensitivity in a minute. You've heard me talk about it before, but it's so important. But the other thing that gets missed a lot of times is that ADHD there is an interest-based brain. Individuals are not being difficult when they can attend better and longer to tasks that are in their wheelhouse, to tasks that they find inherently interesting. It does something chemically in the brains. The dopamine that is released, that is a reward feeling that they're going to keep doing. They're not controlling that.
Yeah.
And the other thing is, I tend to be drawn to things that are in my wheelhouse. If I'm better at this, I'm going along at this pace, I can do this all day long. When I'm doing a task that is not in my neurodiverse wheelhouse, I'm churning and I'm going to run out of steam faster.
Yeah. My son, I swear, he loves music. He can play piano for hours.
Yes.
And he'll stay focused. He'll stay so well focused on music. It's wild, how much better he can focus.
Is so good because you're doing a lot of fine motor using both sides of your body. The fine motor tasks are self-regulating, except in the stage when they're so frustrating, when kids are struggling with them. There's a huge tie between fine motor issues and ADHD also. So I want to talk about rejection sensitivity on the next slide. We've talked about it before, but how do we have this conversation today without it? And you can see on this cartoon, this young man has gotten all of this positive feedback throughout the day. One person said, you can be a jerk sometimes. He's at dinner that night, all of those other positive comments. We talked about filtering inaccurately, filtering out all the positive, but he's stuck on that comment. And then at night, he can't even go to sleep because that is the only one he can think about. He's on a loop. He's ruminating about it. Rejection sensitivity, dysphoria. Dysphoria is a Greek word that means hard to bear. Real or perceived rejection, that's the tricky part. Perceived rejection also are debilitating, crippling, paralyzing. 98 to 99% of adolescents and adults with ADHD have rejection sensitivity dysphoria. And 30% say it is the most debilitating part of all the struggles they face. So what does that look like? I don't think I'm good enough. I am a sense of shame. I'm not worthy. Think back to our self-esteem show. So I'm going to be a people pleaser. I'm your yes man. I'm a chameleon. Whatever you're into, so am I. You tell me to jump, I say, how high? That can get individuals into a lot of trouble. And especially with impulsivity. And I want to please you. And then they might make some really poor decisions that look like moral issues that aren't.
Yeah.
Opt out. I'm going to feign apathy because if I try and fail, then I'm a failure because I feel like a human doing, not a human being. I am the equivalent of my actions. So if I don't do something well, I'm a failure. So I don't try at all. That's why I didn't do well. I'm trying to preserve self-esteem. We don't want to preserve at all costs. On the flip side of that is perfectionism. I have to do everything perfectly. That'll get me approval. Rage, suicidal ideation. This is often rejection sensitivity, often misdiagnosed as a mood disorder or social phobia. But get this, 50% of people assigned court-mandated anger management classes have previously unrecognized ADHD. So if we are holding people, yes, we've got to train them. We've got to learn what to do with the anger. We must teach kids that anger is a signal. This is something they care about. Even parents, what do your kids get so angry about? There's passion in there. Anger is the tip of passion. If you can figure out what enraged them about that, you are finding something they care about deeply. And that energy can get redirected to something productive. But we must take care of the underlying issue, the neurodevelopmental issue that is leading to the anger.
If we can only just stay calm in those moments.
It's so important. I mean, we must do the safe harbor for our kids. You go, have a hanging punch bag that you go let it out on later. But in that moment, if we escalate, all we do is escalate them more. Yep. If they were trying to, we did a whole defiance show. If they bait you and you step into the ring, you're on their turf now. That's where they thrive, even though it's not what they want.
Yeah.
So I just had to share this rejection sensitivity. It often gets misdiagnosed. It is very important to know this.
Yes.
All right, let's move on. So why all the confusion? So many times there are missed diagnoses or a complete misdiagnosis. Missed meaning depression often gets diagnosed instead of ADHD. If it is depression, we must take it seriously. But it can happen in reverse where ADHD gets diagnosed and it's actually depression because there are so many overlying symptoms, but it might be both. It is so important to rule out everything else. Just because you identify something that's wrong doesn't mean you're finished yet. Think about it even from reading. If we find out a child has auditory processing and language issues that lead to reading struggles, and we address that, but they also have visual perception issues getting in the way, we are not taking care of all of the struggles underlying the way they're reading. Same thing goes with this. And arguably, all of it's important. What's more important than mental health, right? So with ADHD, you can often see the symptoms as early as 4 years old. You might suspect it even earlier, but you can accurately start saying, okay, this looks like ADHD at age 4. A lot of times diagnoses do not happen until age 6, but the experts are saying we pretty much know at age 4. Whereas with depression, that's probably not going to be the case. The average age of diagnosis is in the early 30s, although it starts going up around age 18. With ADHD, there are a lot of times sensory issues. I don't know that I've ever worked with an individual who had ADHD who did not have sensory struggles, but those can also be separate. You can have ADHD without the sensory. You can have sensory processing challenges without the ADHD. We've talked about the emotional dysregulation and the impulsivity, restrictive repetitive behaviors. These are so often thought of in terms of autism, but this happens with a lot of neurodevelopmental struggles where I'm getting overwhelmed. And so my body checks out and I start doing something with my fingers. I'm twirling my hair. I'm picking at my skin. shrugging my shoulders, start doing these repetitive behaviors, my brain follows my body that has checked out. Hyper focus. We talked about that. This is in my wheelhouse. I can do it all day long. Hyperfixation. Perfect example in that cartoon of the young man who got fixated on the negative comment he received. Rumination, just a loop of thinking. Hypervigilance. We've talked before about how the brain cannot tell the difference between real and perceived threat. And so I'm in anxiety mode. I've already been told I'm lazy, apathetic, task avoidant. I feel threats coming at me. I'm having to prove myself. There might be sensory things. And so they may lash out as if you might notice fight or flight things kicking in here. And it's important to know that they've probably gotten more negative feedback than the average kid. And they may have sensory issues where their brain is saying you're not safe, and they lash out as if you're a predator. And it's really a visceral response that we have to take care of. And of course, everyone knows that there tends to be issues with organization, time management, planning, all of those things. Working memory difficulties are foundational parts of our critical thinking. And in ADHD, this is problem-solving memory. I'm facing a problem. It can be social or academic. I pull in information from my background knowledge, use it, manipulate it to handle the task at hand. Because of the flooding of emotions, sometimes my sketch pad gets filled up with the emotion. I do not have room for my social skills, for the rule I learned. I don't even have the pause button to think through those things in the first place, but my emotion takes up my whole mental sketch pad. Then I appear to be lacking empathy because I don't have room for your emotion on my sketch pad. And so I don't take on your point of view, your perspective. I may not even have those skills, but even if I do, it becomes difficult. Depression, you see changes in appetite or weight. Now, I put a caveat here because I'm talking about what the books say, but then in my parentheses, I'm saying real life. Real life, I also see this with ADHD, but it is usually related to a side effect of ADHD medications where it can really decrease appetite. The other thing is that is part of our sensory system, knowing when I'm hungry, when I'm full, when I'm thirsty. If you have kids who have equilibrium, body awareness, auditory, visual perception issues, they may also have issues sensing hunger and fullness, and that can impact weight. So that's a caveat, but it's not considered a core feature of ADHD. With depression, there might be unexplained aches and pains. These can be physical or mental. Anhedonia, that is like lack of feeling anything. Sometimes there are no tears. And that is really considered a deeper stage of depression than when you can cry, when you can feel something. Change in menstrual cycles, body-brain connection, recurrent thoughts of death or suicide. We always take this seriously. Always, always, always. Sometimes kids do make comments like this and they aren't actually considering taking their life. But I am feeling low and my feelings are abstract. So I'm going to put concrete words to how bad I'm feeling to try to get the point across to you. But we never assume that. So always take that seriously. But with depression, of course, suicidal ideation is much, much higher. In individuals with ADHD and depression, it's off the charts, the rate of suicide. Not to mention how tied ADHD is to even eating disorders and how many 10 to 15% death rate there with heart attacks or suicide. But overlapping symptoms, sleep is impacted with ADHD and depression. Oftentimes, kids with ADHD have difficulty falling asleep, racing minds, hyperarousal. A lot of times individuals with depression will fall asleep and then they wake up with worry and having uncomfortable thoughts going on. Anxiety in both. Sometimes anxiety leads to depression because anxiety might paralyze me. And then I feel bad about myself because I don't carry through on things. And then the more I beat myself up, then depression follows. Now, you see self-harm here in the middle, whereas I had recurrent thoughts of death or suicide with depression. That is because a lot of kids or adults with ADHD will engage in self-harm behaviors. I'm not feeling anything. So the cutting is like I'm trying to feel something. They're not trying to take their life off and when the self-harm happens, but those are still very serious conditions to take seriously. With Selfworth, again, how many times have kids with ADHD been told, you're the problem child, you're lazy, task avoidant, unmotivated, apathetic, difficult, the problem child? They're going to start believing the script they're given, unfortunately. With depression, often self-worth is, just I'm inadequate. I'm not good enough. So, shame can come in with either one of these. Often the source of that, it might be different, but overthinking can happen with both. Decreased concentration with both. Difficulty with executive function. With depression, there might be foggy thinking. In fact, a lot of times, depression usually is not diagnosed until other things have been ruled out, not just ADHD, but even thyroid disorders and things like that. We need to know where it's coming from, because with thyroid, that is a hormone. It can definitely impact well-being, as well as energy and concentration. You get that foggy thinking. I had that foggy thinking before mine got treated properly. Loss of interest in things you previously enjoyed. Hopelessness. You wonder why these kids start acting unmotivated. I've tried, and nothing is good enough. So what's the point anymore? Part of hope is I believe I have the agency, the competencies to get me from A to B where I want to go. Individuals with depression, I don't see hope for the future. I mean, the outlook is bleak. Maintaining friendships. A lot of times individuals with ADHD come off as bad friends when they're not. They got distracted. It wasn't that they didn't care what you were saying. They're emotionally hyperaroused, and so they might kind of snap at someone. You can imagine the types of things with ADHD that can interfere with friendships. And maybe the lack of understanding when, man, this person's with depression or complainers, they're so doom and gloom, it's not fun to be around. And they may not have the energy to, you want to go out to eat? No. And then it looks like they're not really invested in the friendship. So irritability with both. Fatigue is generally attributed more to depression in a lot of textbooks, but I'm here to tell you, doing this for 30 years, so many times, no matter how hyper-aroused kids are or adults, fatigue sets in because you might have this pinball machine going on, you're not sleeping well. I'm doing tasks in a neurotypical world, and I'm neurodiverse, and I'm trying to fit a square peg into a round hole, and I have these deficits, and because I'm so gifted, people think I'm not trying when I struggle. A lot of twice exceptional kids. The more you churn, the more you're going to run out of steam. It empties your bucket. So this is why these so frequently get misdiagnosed. One gets missed, or and it's both, or one gets diagnosed and it should be the other. Much more frequently, depression gets diagnosed when it should be ADHD, as opposed to the other way around. But both are very real. Okay.
I love this chart, the differentiation of it helps you troubleshoot for yourself and your kids.
Thank you. I put a lot of time into this. I made that. And so some of these, they're sort of like more one than the other, but look how many things overlap. Make sure the people you go to really know what they're doing, specialize in this, because so many times this is not taught in medical school. And I'm talking about with very competent people. The DSM-5, the diagnostic manual that professionals use to diagnose ADHD, it does not even list emotional hyperarousal, and it is a core symptom. I'm hoping that changes in the next version. The last one came out in 2013. It's like, come on, we need DSM-6 because those of us who do this know this to be true. Yeah. Now, how can I kind of tease these apart aside from the symptoms we've been looking at? With mood disorders in general, they are not triggered by events. So clinical depression, bipolar disorder, we could go on and on with a lot of these. They're not triggered by events. You can't pinpoint, this is why I'm feeling this way. Having said that, there are caveats to this. We know that grieving a loved one can definitely lead to depression, and that's an identifiable thing. But in general, in life across the board, so many times depression does not have, this is the trigger, this is what brought it on. I feel bad and I don't know why. Whereas with emotional hyperarousal, with ADHD and a lot of other neurodevelopmental challenges, it is triggered by an event or the perception of the event, the perception of rejection or criticism or failure. So the word perception cannot be overstated here. So let's say your son comes home from school and you're like, how did that conversation with your English teacher go about about your paper being late and how you can make it, what you can do to make up some point. You're just asking a question. And they might lose it as if you attacked them. So their perception was you were coming down on them and reminding them of how they were late turning it in and suggesting that they didn't remember to talk to the teacher when really you just said, how'd it go?
Yeah.
Random example, a fight with a sibling where they each want a certain toy. They always get what they want. I never get what I want. Not true. Their perception, they're being done wrong. It's not fair. We did a whole show on that. Their reaction is not in keeping with what actually happened. It is in keeping with their skewed version of what happened. I hope that makes sense.
It does. This is actually very, very helpful. There's so much going on in my own head, just trying to think about just my own self and everything that I go through, being a mom and taking care of everything. I do wonder sometimes, like, how much of the struggle that I have and frustration that I have could be something like depression or ADHD, or is it just I'm a mom and so I'm struggling with, new stimuli that I didn't have before. But the fact that you're saying, like, this is triggered by an event, it makes so much sense versus depression being kind of just like an overall thing that kind of is there all the time. I think that's a really great differentiator to help people figure out, like, how and why this is coming about, which thing it is, because that's the most important thing, right? Is like how to get the best treatment possible.
You have to know which thing it is or things combination, or else you're aiming at the wrong bullseye. I can't tell you how many families, including the parents, not just the kids, who come in and said, I tried antidepressants. We've tried this many antidepressants. I myself, as a not me, but it's like talking to someone, was on this and it didn't help. And then I found out it was ADHD. Light bulb moment, everything's better. So think about emotional hyperarousal. There's a whole lot of reactivity and misperceptions going on. Mood disorder, I don't know why I feel this bad. And that's, by the way, a reason why so many of these individuals beat themselves up more, and it becomes a vicious cycle, because what is wrong with me? I don't have a reason for feeling this way. You do in the brain, but it feels that way. There's nothing tangible you can put your finger on. What's wrong with me? Everybody else is happy. That kind of thing, that kind of talk. But mood disorders are usually a gradual onset over weeks to months to diagnosis. It has to have been uninterrupted for at least 2 weeks. I think it's very rare for someone to seek help when it's only been 2 weeks. Normally 2 weeks isn't long enough that somebody has already been like, okay, we're going to get on top of this. You don't really know it is a thing yet. And just like the gradual onset, it's gradual resolution over weeks to months, not by itself, but by doing the right things. And it's unaffected by attempts to feel better, takes on a life of its own. Whereas with emotional hyperarousal, reactivity, misperceptions, this situation was a 4 on a scale of 0 to 10 and acting like it was a 10 because that's how they perceived it. Brain emotions, thoughts, actions, emotions all impact one another. It's instantaneous. Everything was great. Boom. Lower the hammer. Everything is awful. Who just flipped a switch? That is emotional hyperarousal neurodevelopment. These rarely last more than a few hours. Usually by the next day, everything's fine. You're like, oh, hello, Jekyll and Hyde. But it was event-based. Now, it doesn't mean the next day the same thing doesn't happen. So we're talking this could happen every single day, but they're separate events.
Yeah.
Misperception event, 0 to 10, reactivity, misperceptions, blah, resolves. Next day, the next thing happens that they perceive, same thing all over again. So you can have this perpetual cycle, but you can see the start and the end of the event from day to day.
Yeah, for sure. That's how I look at this, and I can tell you my son is properly diagnosed with ADHD because he resets like nobody's business. I'm like, oh, you're fine now. I'm still over here like licking my wounds from our argument, but you're fine now. You've moved on. It's
kind of like, I hate you. Hey, you want some popcorn? Like once the time comes, it's just, and I'm telling you, some people will say, my child seems schizophrenic. And I get that. But this is, don't say that in front of them. Be careful, get it checked out in the right way, because it really was misperception, feelings hurt, lash out. I have time to settle down. I'm no longer being reactive. I'm in my logical brain. Okay, we're good.
Yeah.
So their normal moods, it doesn't seem like it because the intensity is off the chart. So that part is not normal at all. But think to yourself, if what he thought had happened actually did, would how he's acting make more sense?
Sure.
And that's how you know. But individuals with ADHD are 3 times more likely to suffer with depression. Over 50% of those with ADHD will experience depression in their lifetime. We're going to talk about this on the next slide. There's an important thing to note on that. And 30 to 40% diagnosed with depression also have ADHD. So lots and lots of overlap. Make sure you got the right one, or is it both? Is something being missed? Okay, let's move on.
Oh, there we go.
So I'm not going to read through all of this. We have mostly been talking about the very first thing there, clinical depression. I have this typed out for you in case anyone wants to take a screenshot. I don't really think we need to go through this. I talked about clinical depression. There is also a persistent depressive disorder that's just chronic and ongoing. It may not have the major lows of the other, but complaining, gloomy, even in the best of days. My kid's getting married and I don't feel real joy, that kind of thing. Bipolar is believed to be overdiagnosed in kids. And so because of that, some changes have been made to the diagnostic manual. This is less common. It affects about 2.6% of Americans, but you have to have the extreme highs, which is known as mania, and the extreme lows, depression. And see, you can see how because of when we think about ADHD, there's an event, I misperceived, blah, I get over it, I'm fine now. That often is thought to be bipolar. Be real careful about that.
Yeah, it's interesting too,
that
because, like, I know that my son has where he does seem very hyperactive sometimes, and I could see how someone might think it does seem like a manic-like state, but I don't notice like super lows in him. I see high states sometimes, but I think that's just like he's super excited and it manifests itself in a very it's a very high. But that's very important, right?
Hyperarousal, hyperactivity, you can see that. So just know that it is believed that bipolar mood disorder has been overdiagnosed in kids, and there have even been changes made to the DSM-5, which is the diagnostic manual that clinicians use, so that to hopefully make that stop happening so much. But the other question, okay, a person can have depression and ADHD. Chicken and egg thing, but it does matter. What came first, the chicken or the egg? Maybe that doesn't matter. It does matter to know which one of these came first, because the one that is the most debilitating needs to be treated first. And so many times the type of depression that individuals with ADHD have is secondary depression. The depression comes as a direct consequence of living life with ADHD, of having negative labels assigned to them, personality and character labels, of having to try to fit into this neurotypical world when we should be adjusting what we do and fit them. I mean, let them be themselves, not square peg round hole. How can we support their struggles and celebrate their strengths? So they've struggled for years. This happens so often when it's misdiagnosed. And they started believing, yeah, I'm lazy. I don't care about anything. I'm stupid. I'm the problem kid. I'm the problem worker. I lost a job. I can't keep relationships. Really has a lot to do with being misunderstood and it being overlooked. So they're demoralized.
Yeah.
That looks like depression. So it is secondary depression. And sometimes the frustrations get misdiagnosed as depression when really this is an expected response from their life experience. Okay. So just because there's frustration in secondary depression, it might not be clinical depression that needs to be treated as depression. Very individual specific. You definitely need to go talk to your doctor, talk to people who specialize in this. I'm having to give broad strokes in a forum like this. Okay, let's move on. So if it is mild, lifestyle options for improving mental health. I won't spend a lot of time on this because most of these are very intuitive, but there is direct research. We know that aerobic exercise helps profoundly. In fact, there have been studies that show that regular aerobic exercise rivals the healing power of antidepressant drugs. So this says 30 minutes at least 3 times a week. I'm going to tell you, if you have kids with ADHD, the ideal would be 60 minutes of exercise every day. Reduce carbs, meditate. What hobbies are they intensely interested in? We talk about self-care for parents, and not losing who you are aside from the roles you fill, and doing your hobbies, your philanthropic efforts that mean something to you and your soul. We need the same thing for kids. Fish oil, vitamin D are often very helpful. I've done shows before. I've talked about different supplements that can help. Plenty of sleep. And I know that's hard, especially with ADHD. Consider melatonin. We know that often kids have lower melatonin levels in their brain. That is a very neuroprotective chemical. It's a naturally occurring chemical in the brain, and that can really help. And it's recommended to take it 90 to 120 minutes before bedtime. A lot of times people will do it 30 minutes before, and then it takes too long to kick in, and then it's still in their system when it's time to get up in the morning. A lot of individuals have a seasonal affective disorder. And of course, it's summertime. So, and you and I are in Texas and Florida. So you're like, yeah, this is pointless. But you might live in a place where it rains a lot, or you work indoors all the time and you're around artificial light, but not the right kinds of light. So consider light exposure. Look into that if you suspect you might have seasonal affective disorder. Reduce rumination by identifying and redirecting negative thoughts. If your kids are unaware of the self-talk, sometimes negative self-talk, they say it out loud. Like, oh, I'm so stupid, when they're working on homework. They may not even know they're saying it.
Yeah.
So we need to draw their attention to it. And we talked before about how you cannot replace a negative belief about yourself with something, positive affirmation. I'm the smartest person ever. Number one, that's not even what we aspire to. But what is something that is believable to them that we can move it up to and then get it more positive over time? Like, I catch on to math really quickly. If I keep working in language arts, that's going to get better too. I'm just not quite there yet. Make it believable, but they may not be aware. We must change negative ruts of thinking. Have them carry around a journal when they catch themselves saying something negative or thinking something negative about themselves. Counter it with something they can believe as true, even if it's neutral. As long as it's not negative, we're moving in the right direction. Super powerful. And we've talked about exercise, but outdoor, I can't tell you how much research there is about the power of green space. One of my very favorite things to do is to go for a hike in nature. I'm getting the exercise and the beauty of nature all at the same time. And I feel like a new person afterwards every time.
Yes.
Okay, let's move on. So we already talked about exercise. When you're kids, especially if we're talking about emotional hyperarousal, we all need to be able to articulate our emotions. 77 to 78% of students in behavioral intervention programs at school have issues with complex language, and often that complex language involves social emotional language. Give them more words for how they're feeling. If they only know the word infuriated, they are going to feel a 10 on a scale of 0 to 10 infuriation anytime they're in the realm of mad. Teach them disappointed, frustrated, irritated. Grow their social emotional granularity. The more I have words to think about emotions in layers, the more I start experiencing them that way, and the behavior follows. And then my frustration is a 4 instead of a 10. Curb electronics. We don't have time to talk about this. Y'all already know. Too much of anything is too much. We have to get moving, got to get outdoors. We talked already about anger as a signal, not an outcome. Do something positive with that anger. There is passion underlying that anger. Anger is almost always a secondary emotion, secondary to sadness, secondary to disappointment, etc. Work with them. Be co-pilots on problem solving, not you just solving it for them, but collaborative problem solving. Remember, behavior says, I am facing a situation, these expectations outmatch my toolkit to handle it. Behavior is communication, but teach them to be problem solvers. In case I haven't said this enough, consider comorbid conditions. Just because there's one diagnosis, is it the right one? Is there also something else going on? So important. Journal. What's going on? Look for the patterns. Skip physical punishment. And I know somebody's going to watch this and think I'm crazy. We know from decades and decades and decades of research that the type of punishment, I don't really like that word, but that works for neurotypical kids is not the same thing that works for neurodiverse individuals. It's not. So kids need to know that you're in control. They need to know you're the boss, you're the authority figure. They actually feel safety in that. When they are being defiant, they are not trying to take away your control, even though it feels like it. They are simply seeking some of their own, and they're communicating, I'm struggling. Talk it out with professionals, talk it out with them. Always have open-ended conversations so that when the real stuff, the heavy stuff comes up, they don't clench up and wonder, why are we talking like this? Because you always have one-on-one time. You always have connected quality time with each other. Okay.
I love all of these suggestions. I love them.
And the last suggestion, and there's so many things we could talk about. We could talk about body mapping, because individuals with ADHD often don't have that self-regulation, and they're not as in touch. Before they know it, it was just already at a 10. Having them draw on their body how they feel when these emotions are escalating. That way, when they feel the knot in their stomach, they already know they need to stop and do some breathing. They need to take a walk. They need to talk it out. They need to use their self-regulation strategies. But if they don't have body awareness, they're not going to benefit from that. We have to grow body awareness first. But catastrophizing, I practice that word, girl.
You said it.
For some reason, it's easy for me now. For anybody who hasn't watched, I say this word all the time, and I always add a syllable, and I know I'm doing it, and I can't stop.
I kind of like catastrophizing. It's fun.
I'll put to say wrong now. But to grow perspective, and even we as adults can do this. You may not need an emotions thermometer. This is appropriate for anyone who's struggling with hyperarousal. So if you really think about what was the problem, it could even be a fight with your spouse. Like, what really happened? What was my response? And so when you okay, what actually happened was a 2. My response was a 5. As an adult, think about what's underlying that. There's something deeper with that. But with kids, it really helps make concrete the idea of granularity. An excellent idea to do with kids every day is to have them rank their day from 1 to 5. 1 means, you can make the 1 or the 5 be whatever you want it to be. And then share what your day was. Rank your day and say why. It really starts helping them understand shades and degrees of situations. And that way, even they're in their logical brain, they're not even in an emotional outburst moment. They start learning, there's a scale on this stuff. It's not all or nothing. That's a great thing to do every single day.
I love that.
All right.
I think I need to do that more often. Oh my gosh, we're to the end. This is the beautiful slide where you get all the information so that you can be in contact with Heather and her amazing Brain Balance team. As you can see, we've got all 4 locations there. The Woodlands, how are things going in the Woodlands, our new location?
It's going so well. It has been so busy. It makes me happy. People are out living, and man, people are flooding the center, and it is awesome. And we just have some amazing families who have joined us.
I love it. And if you have not been aware, there is an adult program now. So you can also get some help for your adult. I've marched my bottom right into there and get some help for myself, because Heather has made it her mission to help families and individuals. So follow her at The Hidden Churn and watch her on Thursday with Dr. Brian.
Yes, Thursday at 3:30. We are talking about why does my kid lie, and what that has to do with kids going into fight or flight response, and why it happens, and what you can do.
I love that. Well, as always, Heather, it's been a pleasure. Thank you so much. And we'll see you guys all next week. Same time, same place.
Thank you, Jen. Thanks, everyone. Have a great week.
Bye, Heather.
Bye.